Hello.
Our story begins inside the Marauder with the Bad Batch. They were about to be transported back to Camino for the first time in several rotations. Instead, they received a communication. When they answered, they were surprised it wasn't a clone commander or Republic officer. They looked at General Anakin Skywalker, who had just finished up his battle at Coruscant. Palpatine was delivered to the Senate building, and he had a little reunion with Padme. Anakin had a short moment and he asked the Bad Batch if they had any missions going on. They didn't, asking him what it was that he needed for them to do. He told them that there was an insurgency at Mandalore, and the troopers there might need reinforcements. Anakin also informed them of Maul and how he was a critical target. The way General Skywalker phrased everything, it almost seemed as if these targets were related to the ending of the Clone Wars, so the Bad Batch took it as Maul was a separatist leader. This obviously wasn't true, but they accepted their new orders and rerouted for the Mandalore system. Anakin wasn't worried that Ahsoka was incapable, but he believed that it'd be beneficial to her cause to have allies at the Bad Batch. Plus, how bad could it be having extra clone reinforcements, especially like Clone Force 99? The Bad Batch tried to get into contact with the fleet present, but there was no response, so they went in blind. At the moment, the clones on Mandalore were securing the planet and preparing to push into the sewers. Ahsoka and Rex made sure every citizen was evacuated from any potential danger. Bo-Katan was also able to deal with Olmec inside the same room where her sister was killed. Clone Force 99 arrived right as the siege was slowing down and the battle stopped intensifying. Once they actually got to Mandalore, they were able to get in contact with Ahsoka and Commander Rex, as he was referred to now. Rex remembered their mission on Anaxes and told Captain Vaughn to wait for their arrival. Clone Force 99 would be the best unit to patrol the sewers. Vaughn waited, while Rex explained to Ahsoka who this clone unit was, being that she wasn't familiar with them. At the entrance of the sewers, Captain Vaughn watched the Bad Batch land, telling them that they weren't expecting special forces. Hunter moved his hand forward as the other four members ran. He then looked to the clone captain and informed him that that was the point of being special forces. Captain Vaughn looked to the other clones and they followed the batch into the void. Clone Force 99 took point. Tech informed the group that there were long-range communications coming from down one of the corridors. Hunter issued out one of their command orders, and Crosshair ran forward, aiming his sights down the walkway, informing the other men that it was clear he wasn't detecting any movement. The unit understood that these weren't battle droids, so their strategy had to be completely different from what it usually was. Echo and Wrecker followed closely behind Crosshair, as Hunter told the Regs to keep close and not spread out. Tech had done some research prior to getting here about the Mandalorians, so he was kind of up to date. Their strategies were, in his own words, rather primitive for advanced civilizations, but it's because they were semi-effective, due to the reputation of being Mandalorians. The clones moved through the sewers and then they stopped. Hunter moved and took point, noticing that they were on the right track. He positioned Tech and Echo at the back of the lines because he figured the Mandalorians might launch a trap at them. He then told the Reg captain to prepare for something his basic training couldn't prepare him for. Vaughn was confused, but Hunter turned back and Crosshair was ready. He had thrown out a series of mirror devices and reported seeing a communication going on. There were three figures, one being a pike. He wasn't sure about the other two. Tech was trying to intercept the communication frequency so they could track it. Again, under the assumption that this was a separatist plot, they figured whoever the leader was talking to was involved in this. Crosshair asked Hunter for the order, and Hunter paused, giving Tech more time. And when Tech finally got a hold of the frequency, the shot was fired. Maul felt it a split second before it shot him in the back of the head. Instead, Gar Saxon was domed in the face, before the Mandalorians all jumped into a panic, but they were too slow to react. Using his mirror technique, Crosshair was able to fire 5 more shots, killing 4 Mandalorians and injuring another. This obviously revealed their position, but Maul ran into the tunnels. It wasn't the right time for the fight yet. The other Mandalorians covered him, running into the corridors and unleashing their traps on the clones. Thankfully, the Regs had Clone Force 99, because Crosshair, Hunter, and Wrecker were able to fight off the approaching Mandalorians from the front. Crosshair's expert marksmanship was able to clip a rocket before it launched down the hall, which forced it to explode right in the Mandalorians' faces. Echo and Tech were on the back side, and they didn't have too much room to maneuver, but with Reg assistance they were able to keep their casualties at a minimum and push the Mandos back. Due to the curiosity of who these separatist allies were, Hunter led Crosshair and Wrecker forward once the skirmish was complete. Despite Tech learning about Mandalorian strategy, he didn't familiarize himself with their political past, or in other words, he never looked at the cause of this Mandalorian rebellion, or how Maul came into power. In short, he had no idea Satine was a Duchess of Mandalore, and never even heard her name. Mandalore was so far removed from the war in his mind that he didn't even think about it until they were dispatched to this location for combat. Regardless, they came around and dusted a couple Mandalorians. One's left behind to make sure Maul wasn't tracked further into the sewers. Hunter grabbed the communication device and gave it to Tech, telling him to take it back to the Marauder so it could be analyzed and they could figure out where the rest of the Separatist allies were. It was clear they were trying a last-ditch effort to win the war. Vong, like most Regs, wasn't content with the Bad Batch going over his command, but Hunter addressed those concerns by asking that a couple of his men go out with Tech and inform the commander that they were on the trail of Maul. They could likely end the battle earlier here with extra reinforcements. For now though, they needed to fortify their positions in case another attack came. Vong sent a couple troopers with Tech, and they prepared themselves for anything to come. Nothing did. Since the Marauder was so close to the mouth of the sewers, Tech did his analysis while he was waiting for Ahsoka and Commander Rex to arrive. He was able to learn that the best they would find is the pykes on Obadiah, but that was pretty useless information, everyone knew that. However, while he was doing his research, he found that a Jedi craft was reported refueling near the Obadiah system a couple months before. Chances are the Jedi were on the trail looking for information and were deterred. Ironically, despite both these trails leading back to the Pike Syndicate home world, neither were related. The Jedi that went to Obadiah were Anakin and Obi-Wan, and they were there to investigate the disappearance of Sifo Dyas and learn that Dooku, i.e. Tyrannus, was responsible for the creation of the Clone Army. Tech's trail was for Crimson Dawn. When Ahsoka and Rex arrived, Tech joined them and brought them to the rest of the troops. They were accompanied by 50 or so of Rex's best men. He also left Bo in charge of his other troopers for the time being. He didn't think she'd be reckless. She was grateful the Republic at least came to her. Tech explained everything he knew to Ahsoka and Rex before they continued into the main chamber where the Bad Batch and Captain Vong were gathered. Hunter informed them, once they arrived, that they had 3 separate routes that could work, but he suggested that they stay together, or at the very least go in 2 separate groups. Ahsoka asked why, and Hunter believed that the Mandalorians could be troublesome for the Regs, especially without the Batch around them. He did say this in confidence with her and Rex, so no one else heard it. Ahsoka looked to Rex and he didn't disagree per se. This wasn't a question of his troops' skills, it was more so the effectiveness of the Mandalorians in their own tunnels. The Batch did well, but Hunter was insinuating that things could have been worse, even for them, because they didn't expect the Mandalorians to attack as they did. The plan was agreed upon and they moved forward, following the leads of the group, Ahsoka, Rex, and Hunter. The clones ran through the sewers as they followed the trail of the Mandalorians. Hunter was more sure about one path and Ahsoka trusted his intuition, so the unit moved in that direction. They were in the tunnels for nearly an hour before the first contact was made. The sewers came to an end and opened up into a location of the Great Forge. The Mandalorians had been congregating down here, preparing for their attack on the clones, and what would be their heroic fight to save their home planet. When the first Republic fighters came out of the tunnel, they were met with looks of disgust before Hunter shoved Ahsoka and Rex to the side and jumped down. The Mandalorians prepared themselves, most of them not even wearing their full armor or their helmets. They were just congregating, literally just preparing for the final assault. The clones poured out of the tunnel, firing away. Clone Force 99 made sure they separated themselves from the Regs. Hunter was on the far left with the rest of the squad on the right. He gave the hand motions, and Crosshair, Tech, Echo, and Wrecker pulled around the flank, giving the Regs a chance to get behind cover. Hunter did the same on his side as Ahsoka ignited her lightsabers and blocked blaster shots, using all of her old skills to defend herself and try to push forward towards the center of the forge. Clone Force 99 had different ideas though. Wrecker got a hold of a large sheet and whipped it across the room. It clipped the number of Mandalorians as Crosshair and Tech took high ground and unloaded their blasters into the Mandalorians with rocket packs. Due to Crosshair's marksmanship skills, he was able to hit the Mandalorians in critical locations. Some in the necks, others in the shoulders or underarms. Tech's firing support just got the Mandos to turn their attention or make valuable targets on their person available for hitting for Crosshair. Maul was at the back of the line, as Echo and Wrecker ran towards the end of the room and Hunter mirrored. The Regs continued pouring out of the tunnel and Ahsoka made a push so that all the men could find cover somewhere and still be effective in the fight without being easy pickings. The skirmish was tense. The Mandalorians outnumbered the clones, but thanks to Clone Force 99, they were taking the Mandalorian attention away from the Regs, which helped their assault. Rex and Vaughn pulled up the middle with Ahsoka, as Hunter, Wrecker, and Echo made their move. They tossed a bundle of droid poppers across the ground and let them charge up as Hunter shot the first one. It sent a wave of electricity over the Mandos and they fell to the ground. This made them easier targets, and then Maul's lightsaber ignited. Ahsoka called out to Hunter, telling him to watch out, as she threw her hands forward, throwing Maul into the forge's exterior with a fourth push. It pierced his back as he slid off, and he raged forward at Ahsoka. The fighting only got worse. Despite most of the Mandalorians being unprepared, those who were finally getting into the fight. With jetpacks and rockets, they were nearly an impossible foe. But with Commander Rex leading the clones, he was able to lead them into countering this counter. Crosshair and Tech moved away from their higher position and joined Jesse as they fired on the Mandalorians. Their armor was tough, but Tech noted that their jetpacks could be used against them. He called out to Hunter, Echo, and Wrecker, who were basically behind enemy lines, and told him that the jetpacks could be used to destroy the Mandalorian flight personnel. The three clones got to cover and turned back towards the Regs, who were trying to press their way, and opened up fire. The Mandalorians started exploding in mid-air or began shooting off from the walls, ceilings, or crates. Ahsoka and Maul, on the other hand, engaged in a lightsaber duel. Maul didn't have anyone prepared. He was stuck here, and he needed these Mandalorians to win this fight. If they didn't, he'd be stuck, or worse, captured by Ahsoka. She wasn't even the Jedi he wanted. He was hoping for Skywalker, or at the very least Kenobi, but not the apprentice's apprentice. That was just disrespectful. He wasn't all that impressive as it was. Ahsoka and he continued back and forth as the battle moved around them. The clones stood their ground, and once it became clear that they wouldn't rout, the Mandalorians realized their fight was at an end. As they tried to make their retreat, Maul called them to rally, but they refused. He led their cause into the dirt, and now they'd have to fight off Bo-Katan to have any chance of reclaiming their home. But what hope was there? They couldn't even fight off clones. Hunter gave Wrecker instructions to use heavy ordnance, which involved fire rockets at the escape routes, either trapping the Mandalorians or killing them in the process of their escape. The clones continued running past the duel. Ahsoka spun herself around using her Shoto to defend her back, before uppercutting with her blade and throwing Maul backwards. He stumbled before regathering his feet, and he threw his blades at her face. Ahsoka ducked under the strike before parrying and cutting Maul's blade in half. He had been here before, and unlike Naboo, he wouldn't fail. Before he could prepare himself, a single shot rang out, and he dropped to the ground. Rex looked at Maul and then to Ahsoka. He stunned the former Sith assassin, and now they could capture him, along with the other Mandalorians present. Getting back to the surface would be a pain, but the clones would. With Bo-Katan, she would show them an easier way to get to the Forge, but that wasn't necessary at this point. The clones lost half their forces in this little skirmish, but they were able to cripple the entirety of the Mandalorian force. Their fighters were into double digits now, and they had no leader. Maul was placed into a Mandalorian sarcophagus, and the remaining Mandos would be dealt with by both allies. Due to the victory coming so quickly, Rex thought it'd be best to keep some troopers here, while he and Ahsoka took a Republic-like cruiser back to Coruscant to deliver Maul to the Jedi and catch up on the status of the war. Captain Vong would oversee the rest of the operation on Mandalore until his next orders were given. Rex and Ahsoka would give their thanks to the batch for all their help during the siege. Hunter would let them know that anytime they needed anything, they would be ready for their call. Due to the hollow information saying that the Bad Batch was on a mission, Depa Bilaba's unit would be stuck on Kaller without reinforcements. Since their mission was complete and they weren't required anywhere else, the Batch became interested in finding out why the Pykes were interested in the war. They took the Marauder off the surface and hovered above the planet of Mandalore, while Tech did some research on the Pykes and their involvement in the Clone War. As they were stationed, they saw Ahsoka and Rex's vessel depart into hyperspace. Tech turned over and informed them that it seemed like the Pykes didn't have a hat in the ring, so to say. The investigation by the Jedi was never put on record, and truthfully, he believed Republic intelligence was unaware of them being anywhere near Obadiah. However, what Tech found interesting is that it seemed that Maul and his little movement weren't even separatists to begin with. As it turns out, the entire siege of Mandalore was a breach of Republic treaties. Essentially, he informed his squad mates about the death of Satine and the rise and fall of Pre Vizsla and why everything was the way it was. It seemed that Maul was in control over a criminal syndicate, one that united the crime families of the Outer Rim. While it wasn't within their mandate as soldiers of the Republic, he noted that it seemed like Maul wanted to start a third faction in the Clone Wars, a faction that could compete with the Republic and the CIS, and attempt to show a power at the end of the war. Tech theorized that Maul wanted to set up a criminal organization so it could strike the Republic and the CIS when they least expected it, believing that these criminals could wait until the war came to an end and strike, and when they made their move, they could reignite the flames of war. This obviously was just a theory, so there was no saying how right or wrong it could be, but it would make sense. Given the nature of their operations, war would be much more profitable to them than ending it. He asked the other members what they thought they should do. Echo suggested that with the war almost over, perhaps it was their duty to at the very least investigate. If there was foul play, then they could go after one of the syndicates, or perhaps, being that they were criminals, try and turn them against each other. Act as if they worked on behalf of the other crime families they were working with. Or in other words, the Bad Batch acting as if they worked on behalf of one of the other crime families and attacked another one. Hunter asked if these crime families were close, and Tech looked back down again, saying that there wasn't much data to conclude that they were. After the Nile died out in the Outer Rim, these families grew into power, so perhaps they weren't. After all, the Zygerians weren't included in their little coalition. Maybe they were competing for the most power, and Maul gave them a common goal to shoot for. The war was almost over. Echo was right. It was their duty to at least check it out. Crosshair was the only one semi-against this, only because if they were captured, they would die in Obadiah. He didn't think they would get captured, but they were completely alone on this mission. Tech spun his chair around gleefully and typed the coordinates for Obadiah. They'd begin their investigation on the Pykes. On Coruscant, the Arquentans lowered itself towards the Jedi Temple and hovered above its staging grounds before landing at the top of the steps and releasing its ramp, giving Ahsoka, Rex, and Maul ease of access down to the temple itself. When they walked down, they were greeted by Master Windu and Anakin, who would receive Maul and pass him off the Syndralic so that he could be dealt with humanely. Ahsoka and Rex would report everything to the Jedi from the Battle of Mandalore and their quick success. Ahsoka was questioned if she would rejoin the Jedi Order, and with Anakin by her side, she decided that she actually would. The war was almost over, and Windu informed her that Kenobi was about to engage General Grievous. Surely nothing bad would happen. Due to her rejoining, Anakin and she would pick up right where they left off at, and Ahsoka's presence would be instrumental in stopping a galaxy-changing mistake. As all this was happening, the Bad Batch was scaling the castle of Obadiah. They were looking for a way in, and Wrecker was trying not to have a panic attack due to his fear of heights. The squad of 5 eventually found a ledge and helped each other over it. This was a covert op. Their entire purpose here was to gather information, so they moved throughout the unknown facility. As they did, they took down Pike Syndicate members and hid them in adjacent rooms. Echo was able to use an Astromech plugin to connect to the mainframe and locate the communication room. Hunter gave Tech and Echo orders to get there and locate what they could. Echo asked Hunter what they were going to do, and Hunter said they'd find a means to make their covert op and attack, if they needed to, of course. Hunter was thinking that they could use the tension, the possible tension that is, between the crime families to turn them against each other, but he wasn't sure yet. He then told the other two to maintain closed comms. They didn't want anything to be picked up by the Pykes. Echo and Tech snuck through an open ventilation shaft that sat at waist level. It wasn't comfortable, but they could maneuver through it pretty easily. They tracked their way to the communication room, where a member from the Black Sun could be heard speaking. He told the Pykes that if Maul had lost on Mandalore, then there'd be no purpose in continuing this alliance. He was the one that promised them collective freedom. Another man spoke up, telling the Black Suns to cool it. There'd be no reason for disunion. Crimson Dawn would grow strong, with or without Maul. He was a cornerstone. If they replaced him, then they wouldn't have to worry about his departure. The Pike man in the actual room asked Dryden Voss if he had any plans for that, or if he was just trying to steer control into his hands. Tech and Echo moved around, trying to get a better look. Echo found another plug-in, but it was outside the vent. Tech was very busy looking up who Dryden Voss was on his data tablet. They could not be caught, but Echo wanted to figure out where Dryden Voss was. As this was happening, a Twi'lek man, apparently representing the Hutts, told the group that if they couldn't get it together, then Jabba would pull away from the Alliance. He would still trade with it, but there'd be no reason to flag himself as a target with either the Republic or the CIS. The Republic used Jabba's hyperspace lanes, and he at this point was vying for control over the Hutt clans. He didn't need to worry about another criminal syndicate. Dryden asked how they could maintain Jabba's loyalty, and the man told Dryden to not mess up. It wasn't very difficult to please the almighty Jabba. The Twi'lek left the call, and the other members continued bickering. The clones listened to the conversation for another couple minutes before it ended, and the Pike leader spoke to his fellow council members next to him. He told them that this was foolhardy. They never should have joined this alliance. The other council members said that if they didn't, their empire would be crushed like the Zygerians. The Pyke reminded him that they weren't as fragile as those foolish slavers on Zygeria. They walked out of the room, so Tech and Echo snuck out, and Tech tapped into the communication table. Echo also broke into the mainframe in the control room with an astromech plug-in. The two of them had a plan, they just needed to inform the rest of the group what it was. They worked dedicatedly for several minutes as Tech sent out a message to the rest of the Crimson Dawn, masking himself as the Pykes. It was essentially a decoded transmission that wasn't meant to be seen by anyone other than the Pykes. While he was listening to the conversation between the Crimson Dawn, he typed it all up. All it said, in basic, is that the Pykes would abandon their relationship with Dryden and the Hutts because it seemed like Dryden wanted too much control and the Hutts were disinterested. The message concluded with a threat though, one suggesting that they could use the alliance of Crimson Dawn to target the Hutts and Dryden Voss to take power, territory, and credits. Echo, on the other hand, started sending out distress signals to other locations around the facility, all of them avoiding the armory where Hunter and the other members were. The signals said that there were Black Suns members inside the facility and they were killing Pyke Syndicate henchmen. The path it followed was the same one the Bad Batch used to get in, so Pyke troopers would find a bunch of incapacitated members and assume the warning was correct. Echo then scrambled their frequencies and left the console. He cleared out a path on the facility map and gave Tech the readout so they could escape without running into any Pyke Syndicate members. Tech pulled it up on his tablet and they jumped into the vents, breaking the calm silence and informing Hunter of the change of their plans. The other members weren't to blow the system until they got there. Tech was going to make sure the attack seemed deliberate. In his little understanding of the Black Suns, they liked to leave little markings of their symbols behind to prove that they were who they said they were. The entire Pyke facility went into lockdown as their men scoured the facility looking for the intruders and finding none. Echo and Tech jumped out of the vents and joined their brothers before escaping from the armory and setting off an explosion. The only issue is the big one. The armory was designed stupidly because it wasn't meant to be an armory at first. It was supposed to be a throne room, but the Syndicate leader of the time hated the look, so he turned it into an armory. The issue is, because the Pykes loved their fuel so much, it was directly connected to the armory. There used to be windows in the design, but they weren't there anymore because it was no longer a throne room. Long story short, the explosion that was supposed to destroy their munitions ended up hitting the fuel line and causing a massive explosion ripping through the entire facility, slaughtering hundreds upon hundreds of Syndicate members. Tech left the Black Sun signal just in case anyone actually survived and ran. The Pykes were in total disarray and the Bad Batch ran through the path Echo planned out for them. They had to kill a couple of Syndicate members, but that was light work for them. When they got outside the facility, they used their original grapples and scaled down the side of it and escaped to the Marauder before jumping into hyperspace. The unsanctioned mission from the Bad Batch would finalize 2 chapters in galactic history. Not only would the Sith be defeated by Mace Windu on Coruscant, but the crime syndicates of the Outer Rim would engage in a civil war. The Hutts and Dryden Voss would start an alliance, one based off of text communication, while the Pykes and Black Suns fought amongst each other, and then the Hutts and Dryden. The reason they turned on the other 2 criminal syndicates is because they didn't get aid from either of them, so they must have been enemies. Dryden and the Hutts believed that if they sat out the war, then they could take both Black Suns and Pyke territory, but that didn't end up happening because they declared war on them. They would simply be blindsided by the Black Suns when they actually bombed Dryden Voss's facilities, not killing him, but almost. The chaos of the Republic mirrored that of the Outer Rim, but Mace Windu's killing of Palpatine wouldn't be the end of the Jedi Order. It looked bad, but Mace revealed that Palpatine was Dooku's ally and told the truth of the whole plot regarding the clone army. The only reason the public didn't turn on the Jedi is because Obi-Wan was responsible for Grievous's death, and Anakin was responsible for Dooku's death. Without those 2 killings, the Jedi would have been on the chopping block for betraying the Republic. The Bad Batch was surprised by all of this, especially since everything looked golden before they went to Obadiah. They would report on their mission, but no one, by this point, would care. After a couple months, the report from their mission would be addressed by the Jedi, who showed gratitude for Clone Force 99 taking the initiative. Master Skywalker would be the one to commemorate them for their hard work during the Siege of Mandalore and their efforts to divide the criminal empire that Maul never spoke about. Even though the war was won, it wasn't over. Without Sidious to maintain control over the CIS military and have their reserves dealt with, CIS rebels would stand against the Republic, and they would declare their own war. The Bad Batch would be employed by the Republic to run covert missions against these rebel forces. The issue is, with the CIS rebels, is they had motivation to win. They got a hold of the CIS reserves and fought against everyone. Luckily, the former CIS government stood against them. Unluckily, these rebels brought in groups like the Black Suns and Pike syndicates to support them. Instead of this resulting in one unified rebellion, it turned into a batch of miniature wars. Dryden Voss was able to slither his way into their minds and take control of them and turn them to his side, making him the controller and the owner of the largest fleet in the Reserve Navy. Because Dryden never cared about the Hutts, he bombed them out of existence and continued his war against the other criminal organizations. Ironically, the Separatist rebels became more so fighters for the criminal syndicates than their own causes. They thought that the Pykes, Dryden, or the Black Suns would care about their moral dilemma with the Republic, but none of them did. They all wanted their own version of power. In a way, it helped the Republic work their way into the Outer Rim, but it was for the wrong reasons. They didn't want these rebels becoming their own real movement, so that's why they went in, not because they wanted to help people. The last official mission for the Bad Batch during the Clone Wars would be their assassination of Dryden Voss, one that would be accomplished by Crosshair and his expert marksmanship. Master Skywalker wouldn't ever come down to the Outer Rim to fight off these syndicates, but his student, Master Tano, would. She wasn't a master, but she was at this point training her first student, so technically. The student was Gunji, the young Wookiee warrior. He would accompany her and the 501st to the Outer Rim, the last full-time serving unit in the Grand Army of the Republic, and they would clean up the last little bit of mess created by the Bad Batch. Clone Force 99 would be with Admiral Yularen on the bridge of the Resolute when the war was completed over Ord Mantell. With all the extra time to get themselves together, the Senate would be prepared for the end of the war, and they would assist the clones with payments and pensions that set them up in the post-war era. The Bad Batch would eventually run into Omega, and they'd begin their own little adventure, one that would result in them ending up on Pabu and living out a peaceful life together. The first one of the group to find love would be Tak, and he would enjoy the good life with Fee. The other boys in the group would eventually find their ones, but the post-war life was good to them. For the other clones galaxy-wide, it slowly became that good life. The integration from soldier life to civilian life was hard. Not every trooper did it, but with rebellion squashed and the galaxy returning to peace, it had to come eventually. With the war actually over, the Jedi would take up new mandates, and some of these would include continuing to serve with their troopers. And with the people rallying around peace, it became a collective mission to ensure the galaxy never fell into a time of war ever again. And that, my friends, is our story. Special thanks to all of our patrons: Benjamin Wells, Jango Fett Clone, Ben Ingram, The Big Red Pure Mark, Diamond Constant, Darth Nemesis, Lord Tibbs, CC2024, Galavan Gaming, Tristan, Mandalore, Sir Willem 1767, Darth Revan, Grandy Bane, Laliant, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo Weewoo67, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Town, Johnny DeGuin, Sansa Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Gamer, Lord Callig, Youngly Slayer 66, Mad Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, Fortis Legacy Star Wars, Erebus, Rex the Wolf, The Main 3 First Names, Darkseid 46, Baron Joshua, and Lord Deadwing. For supporting the channel, smash that like button. Special thanks to N-Sabers for sponsoring our 125,000 subscriber lightsaber giveaway. If you want to find out how you can win one of 6 lightsabers, check the pinned comment down below. Otherwise, check the Patreon, cool things on there. Otherwise, let's talk about this story. So I wanted to do like a Bad Batch story where they have like this kind of criminal syndicate like side plot, but it's also kind of like the main plot. I wanted them to be confused with the whole Crimson Dawn being separatist thing. I think that's the only way they'd actually get involved in it, and then them getting involved in it, like by the time they realize it's not separatist related, they're too involved in it to just be pulled out of it, so they kind of go forward with it. I kind of wanted them to have an effect that lasted both sides of the war, the one that dealt with the criminal empires, but also the one that helped end the Clone Wars, and that simply being because they were at the Siege of Mandalore and helped end that early. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.